All right. Good morning, everybody. Here for the 30th episode, actually, of Pick and Pop, which is pretty cool. I guess I've done this long enough at this point to reach 30, which I usually don't do when I start stuff like this. So I guess that's encouraging for myself. But other than that, I guess to what went on last night and what we have ahead of us tonight, which should be really exciting because we at least have two games going on tonight. But last night's one game was certainly exciting and definitely surprising to an extent. Game one between the Philadelphia 76ers and the Boston Celtics, a classic rivalry. These two teams have met in the playoffs more than any other two teams. This is the 20th time in NBA history that Philly and Boston are meeting each other in the playoffs. This first time since 2012, which was a really, really good series. I mean, going back to 6 years ago when that series took place, that was a Sixers team that was an 8 seed in the Eastern Conference, and they had taken care of the top-seeded Chicago Bulls in the first round due to the injury that Derrick Rose had sustained in game one of that series. They ended up taking the Celtics to 7 games. Game one certainly didn't really look like that was going to be the case. A bit surprising of an outcome in game one as the Celtics take down the Sixers 117 to 101. They outscored Philadelphia in all four quarters last night and really, I think, controlled the pace of the game from the second the game had started. And a big part of this, and I think even Ben Simmons said so after the game, I certainly think a big part of it is the rust that the Philadelphia 76ers kind of had exposed last night. This is a team that hasn't played in 6 days since they beat the Miami Heat games, and then you're facing a Celtics team that was just in an incredibly hard-fought series, really struggled at a lot of points in that series against the Milwaukee Bucks. They only get 1 day off, and then they're kind of in rhythm by the time, they start this series against Philadelphia. A series in which Philadelphia is the decisive favorite. So there's kind of that aspect to it as well. If you're Boston, kind of that continuation of the narrative that they just haven't really gotten the respect all year from whether it be their opponents or the media or whatever that may be. That narrative kind of continues with this series because of how undermanned the Celtics are, especially considering that Jaylen Brown was also out last night and his return isn't really set in stone. Of course, hamstrings are really tricky. You just want to make sure that he is able to play as close to 100% as possible. But last night, it didn't have to be just one player on Boston that was doing all of the contribution. It was kind of a big three that really led Boston to the victory last night. And that big three being Jason Tatum, Terry Rozier, and the all-star Al Horford. Tatum with a playoff career high, 28 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, and a block, was 11 for 12 at the line. Terry Rozier, another sensational performance. He's leading the NBA in three-pointers and three-pointers attempted in the playoffs this year. 29 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals, and a block. He nets a playoff career high, and he was a leading scorer among the Boston Celtics. Joel Embiid actually had 31 and 13 in last night's game. He was the one player the Celtics were not really able to contain. And then Al Horford had 26, 7, and 4 himself on 10 of 12 shooting. So looking at what they were able to bring to the table offensively, other than that, all that mattered was that the Celtics were having to limit the three-pointers from Philadelphia. And I think if this has been a big part of what's made the Celtics all year, has been their ability to defend the three, which in today's NBA, you really can't find any other part of your defense that you would like to be as effective at. And the Celtics are number one in the regular season. And that is what has made them a better matchup than many would think against teams like Golden State and Houston, that when they've played them in the past couple of years, because it has always been a priority of Brad Stevens to make sure that they can defend the three well, they've matched up against teams like that quite well, which I think in a lot of ways is what made this tough for the Boston Celtics. Is, you're putting yourself in a position to where in that first series, they're playing a team that has so much size that, really can simply outman you, and they can also shoot the ball. I mean, looking at Chris Middleton, who was the one guy that could shoot on that team, and looking at how the Celtics defended the three total, they really didn't do it that well in the last series. The Bucks did shoot 37.2% from three. Chris Middleton shot 61% from three. He was 25 of 41 in that series. So they were never really able to contain him. But now when you're playing Philadelphia, they're more athletic than Milwaukee, but they're also not nearly as big. So when it comes to the Celtics defending them, they can get to those shooters easier. When you have a guy like Chris Middleton, who's 6'8" and has a tremendous amount of size and is one of those guys who is athletic enough and big enough to actually match up with a Jaylen Brown or a Jason Tatum, you come to this team, while Robert Covington's the elite defender on the squad, you can get to guys like Dario Saric and even JJ Redick a lot easier than you were able to get to Chris Middleton in the last series. And I think that was really what was on display last night, is the Celtics made that. They reminded themselves and the Philadelphia 76ers that they're very effective at guarding threes. And that is what Philadelphia kind of had to learn last night, going 5 of 26 from three-point range, with 2 of those coming from Joel Embiid. I mean, you're looking at 0 for 4 from Dario Saric, 0 for 4 from Robert Covington, 0 for 3 from Ersan Ilyasova, 2 for 7 from JJ Redick. So they were just not really getting what they're used to getting 3-point wise from their team last night. Now, granted, I do not think that this is going to be the theme of the series. I do think that a lot of that just had to do with rust for Philadelphia. Like I said, Joel Embiid really didn't have any issues last night. He had 31-13 with 5 assists and a steal. But what the Celtics were able to do is, they decided early on that if he was going to be the guy that was going to get his own for Philly, that everybody else had to be adequately defended. And that was obviously the case with 3-point shooters when you shoot 5 of 26, but it was also the case with Ben Simmons. They were really denying him his opportunities at getting to the rim. And while there were a few moments where he was able to break free and nobody was in front of the basket on his way there, Ben Simmons did not have the ball in his hand and was able to just have his way and drive in and get contact. He went to the free throw line 11 times and he had 11 field goal attempts, but this was the kind of game where, Philly shooters aren't on. They need Ben Simmons to kind of take control offensively, make things happen, dish out passes, take the ball into the paint, lower your shoulders and hope to get contact. And while, like I said, that happened at a few points last night, the Celtics are very good at limiting the amount of times that Ben Simmons could do that. There was a lot of ball denial on him. They were doing a lot of switches to make sure that depending on the situation, he was going to be guarded differently. At the beginning of the game, it was a lot of Al Horford on Ben Simmons because of the size similarity and the fact that Horford is really good at staying in front of quicker guys. Granted, Ben Simmons is in a league of his own in that category, but Horford was probably the best choice to guard him at that moment. And then later on, we saw a lot of Marcus Smart guarding Ben Simmons, which I found to be interesting, but not at all that surprising, considering that despite the height difference, Marcus Smart is incredibly strong, has a body that he can stick on pretty much any defender and give them difficulties, and he's excellent at drawing charges. He was able to do that to Ben Simmons yesterday on one occasion. But I think that that's kind of what you're going to see for the rest of the series, at least when the starters are on the floor. Smart and Horford to be the two guys that kind of primarily handle defending Simmons. And then I think as far as Tatum, and then when and if the Celtics get Jaylen Brown back, those are going to be the guys that you see guarding Saric and Covington more. So I think the Celtics matchup wise are in good shape here for the most part. I think they can really lay a defender on most of these guys for Philly and still be able to have their way at the end of the day. I do think that Philadelphia is going to have a very definitive response in game 2. I do not at all expect them to struggle the way they did in game 1. And I mean that both in terms of their 3-point shooting and defensively. I certainly don't expect the Celtics to shoot 17 of 36 from 3. That's just not going to happen. You're not going to get 7 of 9 shooting from Terry Rozier every night, but the Celtics are going to make threes. They're probably going to make at least 9, probably 11 or 12. So when you still think of the fact that the Celtics are probably still going to get their own on threes just with a lower percentage, it's going to make things tough for Philadelphia. And that's going to be probably part of the biggest adjustments that they'll have to make. Is as much as Philadelphia moves the ball, Boston moves the ball essentially just as much. So they're going to need to be quick. They're going to need to show that athleticism that they have defensively to be able to get around and cover all the shooters. And that was particularly difficult last night because Boston had guys that typically aren't really hitting threes. I mean, when you're going around and Shane Larkin is in isolation and hitting threes, which he hit a three last night in that scenario. When you have to worry about guys like Semi Ojeleye being left in the corner. In a playoff series, you'll take those shots. You'll let guys like Ojeleye and Smart have their threes. But the fact of the matter is that if they're on, that can really be what buries you, considering that Rozier, Tatum, Horford, they're probably going to be hitting those shots regardless. So you're going to have to hope for another 3 for 12 game from the field from Marcus Smart, which is what he gave you last night, 2 for 8 from 3. And you're going to have to hope that other guys put up similar numbers if you're Philly to be able to slow down the three-point attack of the Boston Celtics. But I think this will be a really exciting and long series. I do think Philly's probably going to win game 2, but it wouldn't shock me if they didn't. But I think this is a series that if it goes 6 games, I like Philadelphia's chances. However, if it goes 7, I certainly like the Celtics. So I think if you're Boston with home court, winning game 2 would really be big to set the tone going back to Philadelphia. But that's pretty much my thoughts on last night's game between the Sixers and the Celtics. I think game 2 on Thursday will be incredibly exciting. But tonight we get 2 games, which is very nice, of course. The Cavaliers and the Raptors kick off their series. This is the 3rd straight year that they're meeting in the playoffs, the 2nd straight year that meeting is occurring in the first round. Should be a really exciting matchup between the two teams. I definitely like Toronto in the series. I talked about it a bit yesterday. I really just think the Cavaliers are outmanned outside of LeBron James and Kevin Love, and that the fatigue and the wear and tear that kind of went on LeBron in that laborious 7-game series against Indiana, it's going to be tough for him to up the ante against a team that is really the favorite to win the East at this point. So it'll be really interesting to see how much LeBron still has left in the tank, if the rest of the Cavaliers are going to be able to get going at all. But I think Toronto at home tonight will certainly revel in their environment. I definitely expect them to win. And then Pelicans and Warriors game 2. How is New Orleans going to respond to the beatdown that they faced in the second half of that game in game 1? New Orleans was really sticking around for the first half and then were just completely blown out of the water after halftime. And I think it'll be interesting to see the adjustments that Alvin Gentry makes when the game gets to that point. If New Orleans can come out as aggressively and as accurate as they were in game 1, I think a lot of that is, of course, having to do with Rajon Rondo, but the adjustments are still going to have to be made regardless, as Stephen Curry will likely be returning tonight. He was upgraded to probable last night, so the Warriors should be getting that extra spark back as well. And it's likely that he could have played 20 minutes in game 1. So I think the Warriors are in really good shape. I think that may even be more likely of a sweep than Houston and Utah. But other than that, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to enjoy some basketball tonight. 2 good games. I'll be back tomorrow to talk about the reactions from Raptors, Cavs, and Pels Warriors tonight. But other than that, this has been Peter Marzano. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good